Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Hey, I would love for you to help us spread the word by leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts so that other innovators like you can find us. Well, my guest today is Robyn Bolton, and Robyn is the founder and chief navigator at MileZero. It's a consultancy helping medium and large companies build innovation confidently and repeatedly to grow their revenue. So excited. We're going to talk today. She has worked at places like BCG, Procter & Gamble, and has written in Fast Company, Harvard Business Online, New York Times, and many, many more. So excited to dive in with you today and talk a little bit about your journey, Robyn.
Excited to be here.
Well, let's start with your consultancy. I would love to know a little bit more about MileZero. What caused you to create this, and what was the need that you were seeing in the market?
Sure. I've essentially spent my entire career in innovation, in corporate innovation, starting off at P&G, where I was on the team that developed and launched Swiffer and Swiffer WetJet. And I bear all the scars of trying to do something different and something new in a big company, and one that had lots of processes and rules, rightfully so. Then fast forward to, I spent about a decade at Clayton Christensen's firm, father of disruptive innovation, working really closely with big companies to try to help them innovate. And, I just got to a point of realizing that for decades now, we've been talking about the importance of innovation. I mean, how many books, how many articles, how many consultants are out there, but the results haven't changed for companies. And so when I founded MileZero, it was very much with the idea of let's take all the best stuff that is out there and, combine it with the reality that, innovation is a leadership problem. It's not an idea problem. And that means approaching leaders, approaching companies in a different way. Instead of kind of the hired brain that comes in as a consultant, really approaching them as a partner and a support and a subject matter expert and a coach and all of those things, which is kind of what led to the, coming up with the chief navigator title, because that's really the role I play with my clients.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say, innovation is not a idea problem, it's a leadership problem. And I couldn't agree more. I think that when you look at a lot of organizations, they don't have a lack of ideas. They have a lack of process or way to get those ideas confidently and comfortably through the organization so that they can see the light of day. So I would love to talk a little bit about why do some of the most successful companies out there struggle with innovation? What is it that you're seeing as far as what leaders can do to kind of overcome some of these obstacles?
Yeah, it really is. It's so embedded in the way most organizations work, the barriers to innovation.
Mhm.
And what leaders need to do, a headline is basically do the opposite of your instincts, which is terrible advice and impossibly hard to follow. But the reality is that especially in, larger companies, definitely in big public companies, your rewards, your incentives, your metrics as an executive, as a leader are pretty short term. They're
Mhm.
about delivering this quarter or this year. And they certainly don't extend into, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, probably when most leaders aren't even in the role that they're in right now.
Right.
And so naturally, like any human being, I mean, I would do this too. You work towards what you get incented to work towards.
Mhm.
That's how you keep your job. That's how you get your bonus. And so when you have, as we all do, limited resources, you only have so many people, you only have so much budget. And, say a dollar, what a dollar spent on operations is going to get you and when it's going to get you that return. And spending it on innovation, you don't know if you'll even get a return,
Mhm.
let alone when that'll be. Naturally, executives are going to choose the sure thing because that helps them hit their numbers, keep their
Yeah.
job, get their bonus. And so as a result, kind of everything is almost stacked against leaders in terms of it really driving them, motivating them to invest in innovation. And that's why it really requires incredibly brave people to kind of step up and, you know, sort of for the greater good, for the long term, building a legacy, make those investments that are required for innovation and required to stay ahead of competition and required to stay viable in the future, even though it feels uncomfortable in the present.
Yeah, that's really good. And, it's interesting looking at where we're headed economically. It looks like our economy is heading towards a softening, which may even feel like a recession to come. And again, a lot of talking heads out there talking about this. And oftentimes, when it comes to innovation, that's the piece that kind of gets put on the back burner. That's the piece that gets cut. When people are looking at where to cut, typically they cut in the innovation space. And so I would love to talk a little bit about how do you encourage leaders when we do see these economic wins coming to stay the course? And I would even be so bold to say maybe even double down on some of what they're doing in the innovation space.
Yeah, it's ideally they would double down because when everybody else around you is cutting back, if you double down, you're going to be so much further ahead of competition when the economy comes back, and it will come back.
Yeah.
That, I mean, the lead you build, it'll be almost impossible for anyone to make up. That said, that's the what I would say is the right answer, but the right answer is not always the easy answer. And so the first thing I talk to leaders about is, okay, budgets are constricting, economy is softening. Let's use this as a moment to look at where you are investing your innovation. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's look at the things that you're doing that directly tie to your strategies, your priorities, you know, can potentially get you some short-term wins. And then some of the further out innovation, yeah, maybe it is time to kind of put a pause on those, but don't cancel everything. Then really double down on the stuff that's going to get you the returns now.
Yeah, it's powerful what you're saying because I can go back to 2008. I was working at careerbuilder.com. Our CEO told us, hey, yes, we're in a recession, but I want you to produce two new innovative products every year. And it was actually that instead of sitting around licking our wounds about people who had been laid off or challenges that we were facing, we decided instead to forge ahead. And I think that's part of what you're speaking to here is that, when things happen economically, you can't just sit down and kind of sit in it, but you have to figure out what are the ways, what are the mechanics to forge ahead.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it's incredible that you had a leader who had that sort of foresight and courage and, a team that did that because, I mean, you just see the benefits for years afterwards. And it's so motivating to people. I mean, it sucks to feel like a victim and just kind of wallowing in this situation that is just not fun, that is really hard. Whereas if you feel like you have a little bit of agency and you can be a little creative and, share your ideas on how to make things better, it's so much more motivating. And, from a leader standpoint, it just builds engagement, it builds loyalty, it builds all these things that you want in your workforce at a time when everybody else is probably scared and withdrawing in.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's so interesting about if I look back on that season, what it did is it gave us a shared vision and a shared strategy. And you
Mhm.
talked earlier about looking at your innovation programs, make sure they align to the strategies that you want to put forward and focus there, right? There may be some other things that you have that are more long tail and further out, but what are the things that you can rally people around today and get them excited about that? Because again, that breeds productivity, which really leans into what you need in a time where you have to maybe scale back in certain areas.
Yep. Yeah, innovation is I always think of it as a means to an end. And when you're in a company and you're innovating, that end has been defined by the company of, what are its short-term and long-term goals. And so if what you're working on isn't driving to that in some way, it's a hobby. It's really cool. It's really fun, but it'll be the first thing that gets cut. And it probably, again, when you're constricting, when you have fewer resources, it probably should be the first thing that gets cut. But not all innovation is completely out there. Like you said, it's the long tail, and
Mhm.
that can get paused.
So who do you feel like owns innovation? I love asking this question. It's actually a little bit of a, provocative question to ask people who in the innovation space, but that's why I like the question. Who owns innovation within an organization?
Oh, that is a great question because on one hand, I'm like, everybody. On the other hand, I'm like, absolutely not everybody. My answer gets to there's different kinds of innovation. Like We talk about innovation like it's chocolate. You just spread it all over everything and it's going to be amazing. But there are different types of innovation. And so things like, incremental innovation or continuous improvement, everyone should be doing that. You should be building people who ask questions and strive for better and, are constantly trying to improve. On the other hand, kind of that the other end of the spectrum, you have radical innovation, you have breakthrough innovation. These are the things that not just challenge the status quo, but like upend the business model.
Yeah.
And that should belong to, a very distinct group of people who that's where they focus entirely, because operation and innovation are totally different things, are totally different worlds, totally different skill sets. And it's just not reasonable to ask someone to constantly be switching
Yeah.
between those two.
I actually love that answer because I think that what happens often is those things are not grouped and it's
Mhm.
not well defined. And so, to your point, everyone owns it, which in some cases it truly means no one owns it, which is
Yep.
frustrating. But in other
Yep.
cases, maybe they put it in a department and that department now feels frustrated with how do I integrate with the rest of the organization to explain what we do, why we're here, and what the benefit of having us on the payroll is. And so you do see these kind of clunky ways, right? That sometimes innovation is trying to be inserted into an organization and it doesn't necessarily smooth out in a way where people feel they can be successful. And so I would love to know, what have you seen be successful? What have you seen work? And I can, of course, share some things too that I think have been really fun and effective that have worked well.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear your perspective and what you've seen. I've seen most companies struggle with this because, like you said, you kind of set up this separate innovation silo and then they create something that's amazing and that, works in small tests in the market. And then there's this huge chasm in the handoff that they have to cross over of handing it to the core business. And that's just where things die. The core business
Yeah.
doesn't get it, they don't feel ownership for it. They don't know how to measure it. It's a slow death in the handoff. And that's really where folks struggle. So the companies that I see do it well, I talk about kind of bridges between the silos.
Hmm.
So you can't have the innovate, especially the radical innovation people in the core business every day because of that switching. But there has to be a constant connection and a constant flow of information and insights and a sense of kind of shared ownership and very much like a relay where you're running together for a
Hmm.
while. Because if you're just trying to chuck something across the chasm, it's not going to make it.
Yeah. And it doesn't work either way, right? Like when they try to throw
Right.
something over the fence or when they try to throw something back. So both of those are kind of frustrating pieces of trying to insert innovation into organizations, is feeling that sense of like, oh, they just threw that over the wall, or they've done no research and they're throwing it over the wall to the innovation team and now they've got to pick that up and figure out what the person meant and what they were trying to accomplish.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. It's tough.
Yeah. So something that, just going back to my 2008 example, something I have
Yeah.
seen done really well is, to your point, the CEO believing fully that he owned innovation and bringing the rest of the executive team along for that ride, and the entire
Mhm.
organization. And what that looked like was, we had a business plan competition where you could really partner
Mhm.
across different teams. So you saw salespeople come and grab their favorite technology person and work together on an idea and then pitch that idea to the executive team. You kind of had a coach, and then that narrowed down to a bigger event where you would pitch the idea. And the coolest part about this was those people would get to quit their day job and go run the idea down and get the support from all the different departments. And we had a bunch of different innovation programs, but I saw that one be very effective and get buy-in across the board because the entire executive team and leadership team voted on the idea, which meant we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We're going to deploy the people to work on it, and we're going to rally around that idea for the year. And so I do think that there are fun ways to gamify innovation where
Mhm.
it can be a focus in your organization, but I do believe pretty strongly that the CEO has to see himself as an owner in that, if not the main leader, the tip of the spear, because if not, then it does become the silo. And then once it's a silo, now you're working upstream to try to get your ideas into the organization. And that becomes a lot harder. It's not impossible, but it's a
Mhm.
lot harder to do.
Yeah, you're completely right. It has to sit with the CEO. I mean, that was when I was at P&G, AG Lafley was CEO for part of that time, and he had the same mindset of, the CEO has to own innovation, has to own understanding customers and drive that through the organization. The other thing you mentioned about how that the IDEA program was set up, what's so crucial about what you talked about is that there was a plan for what happens after
Hmm.
that event, that you get to leave your day job. There is funding available. We are going to chase this down.
Yeah.
And so many companies, they just plan for the event and then nothing happens afterwards. And what that does, that's not just kind of like this very sad, like, wah, wah, we had fun and now we're back to the real world. It
Mhm.
actually starts breeding cynics
Yeah.
of people who start distrusting leadership and distrusting what the executives say. So,
Mhm.
you know, huge kudos both to the CEO for leading, but also for really putting their money where their mouth is and thinking about what happens after the event and investing in that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's what are we doing after this? Because you're exactly right. It does breed a very cynical attitude. If I pitched that 2 years ago and nothing's happened with it,
Ye
it would almost been better not to do it at all, right?
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about like, let's take a look at employees. We know they
Mm.
have ideas. We know that sometimes those ideas are a challenge to get through the organization. If you're the CEO of an organization or you're, working with the CEO of an organization, how would you help them think about how to structure a way to get ideas to the CEO or to the executive team and then potentially moving throughout the organization? What are some of the ways that you work with teams to do that?
Yeah. So starting off, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier about the strategy is instead of throwing the doors open and saying, send me your ideas, give people a focus. Here's
Yeah.
a problem we need to solve. Here's a priority we need to chase down. So ask people to focus their ideas. Then ask people to not just send in their ideas, but kind of a rationale for them and a plan. A lot of times, because we are full of ideas, somebody will walk into their boss's office and be like, hey, what if we try this? Okay, well, how, when, why, what'll it cost? Like, think through it versus just an idea. So, put some requirements around the information you need to properly evaluate the idea. And then always, always, always make sure you loop back with the person who gives the idea. A lot of times, ideas go into the black box and you
Yeah.
never hear again. You've got to go back to the person and give them really specific feedback of, hey, we're not pursuing this idea because it's actually off strategy, or we've looked into it further and it's more expensive than we thought. But like, you've got to give them really detailed feedback so that they know how to do better next time because they're going
Mhm.
to have ideas, and it's building a skill of really around how to come up with, or I not come up with, but how to pitch great ideas so that they get traction.
I love everything about that because I think that the idea email, inbox that never gets answered. Again, some of these things are implemented with really good intentions, but they actually
Yes.
create more harm than good because when I sent my idea in and it's, 3 months later and no one's responded, now I feel a certain way about whoever's
Mhm,
behind that inbox that's not being answered, right? And so I think that the idea of finding a forum, maybe you provide the template, right? So that they know what to
mhm,
fill out and send that in and then provide that feedback. That is the critical part to build a bench of innovators, a bench of people that actually think about innovation. And I think that's the beautiful
mhm.
thing about what you're saying there is show them your critical thinking or whoever's critical thinking that went into that so that they can critically think next time and give you better ideas in the future.
Yeah, I've worked with a client, a big drugstore retailer, and they did the throw the doors open, send us your ideas, and I think we got over 1,000 ideas the first day, and some of them were like, "Turn the bags from white to blue." It's like, to try to respond to all of those was
Yeah.
just it was overwhelming, and it did have kind of the downward spiral effect.
Yeah, and you're like, "Well, why? Why does it need to be blue?" Now we've gotta do this back and forth to figure out
Yes.
why
Yep,
it needs
and
to
it
be
could
blue.
be a brilliant idea, but, like, I've got 999 other ideas that I have to go through.
Yeah, it's interesting when you ask someone to put rigor into their ideas, it's amazing the drop off that you have when I can sit on the end and type for 2 seconds and fire it off versus having to sit there and build out a business case and think through it and then ask the question, have you talked to a few customers about this? What was their reaction or response? I mean, it's a different level of rigor, and that's
Yeah.
actually the rigor you want because you're teaching your teams how to think and how to think critically
Yes.
about the problem they're trying to solve.
Yep. 100%.
I love that. Well, I would love to know kind of, as we close this segment, what is something big that you're working on right now, or what are you excited about as you kind of go into what's our fourth quarter of the year?
Yeah. So going into the fourth quarter, I'm excited and a little nervous to see how things play out because for a while, companies have been pulling back on
Mhm.
innovation
Yeah.
and cutting. And so I'm a little curious as to like, are there more things to cut? Or is there going to be kind of like, I feel like we saw in the months after the pandemic started, kind of this feeling of like, we need to start moving forward now.
Hmm.
The time for cutting is done. So I'm curious to see how that's going to shake out in the fourth quarter. I'm also in the process, the kind of final months of working on a book that lays
Nice.
out kind of here's a essentially like your 3-year guidebook
Hmm.
to really showing up and being a leader that gets results and setting up the architecture for innovation, the leadership behaviors that you need to show, how you build a culture. And that won't be coming out until March, but going through the process of working with leaders and learning from them and writing the book and getting it ready is exciting as well.
I would say that's pretty big. As someone who published a book a year ago, I don't think
You
people
know.
realize how much blood, sweat, and tears go into writing something and the challenge and it is such you're wrestling a body of work that you want to get out there into the world. And so I'd say that's a pretty
Yep.
big thing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an adventure. I'll just say that.
Well, any final thoughts for our listeners today as they think about their teams, how to bring innovation to the forefront, how to get innovation throughout the organization? Any final thoughts there?
I'd say be brave. When you make mistakes, admit it because that actually gives your team a lot of courage and comfort to make mistakes themselves. And really encourage, as we talked about, encourage people to think creatively and to think critically at the same time. And that's how you're going to unlock so much innovation, so much growth, so much potential in your team and in your company.
I love that. Tell people where to find and follow you.
Sure. So you can go to my firm's website, milezero.io, and the zero is spelled out, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been awesome. I hope people will find you, follow you, and just continue to glean from your wisdom and knowledge. I just love talking to folks like you who live and breathe in this space and love it. And I think that we need more people thinking about innovation within organizations. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah. No, thank you. This has been a real joy.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.